The bloody chapter of the Second World War closed on the wooden deck of the battleship Missouri. 145 Japanese cities lay in ashes. It was September 2, 1945. Delegates walked in silence. They wore top hats and formal mourning coats. Ink touched the heavy paper. American sailors stared without blinking. Former living gods signed the surrender. Far beyond Tokyo Bay, ordinary people tried to survive. The contrast was sharp. The elite lost their pride. The citizens lost everything. A thick smell of burning choked the ruined neighborhoods. Hiroshima and Nagasaki simply vanished. American bombers dropped incendiary clusters for months. Over 100,000 people died in Tokyo alone in a single March night. While the diplomats negotiated their own survival under the guns of foreign warships, normal families dug through the rubble. The leaders chased an imperial illusion. The public paid the price. Carpet bombings erased wooden houses block by block. Survivors searched for food. They found nothing. The politicians saved their own lives. 9 million homeless citizens wandered the streets. What did these wooden neighborhoods burn for? They burned for the illusion of a massive empire that the government fed to the Japanese people for decades. The very ambitions that brought defeated generals to the Missouri started poisoning ordinary families back in the 1930s. The state cranked up the propaganda machine right after invading Manchuria in 1931, and newspapers continuously promised the public endless glory. By 1937, the army captured Nanjing and slaughtered tens of thousands of Chinese civilians. Meanwhile, folks back home blindly celebrated these bloody victories with massive street parades. When the attack on Pearl Harbor happened in 1941, the entire country cheered. People eagerly embraced a catastrophic global war that they could never actually win. But ordinary workers ultimately paid the heaviest toll for this fanaticism. The wailing of air raid sirens echoed over tightly packed wooden neighborhoods every single night. American bombers turned family dwellings into rivers of fire, instantly erasing the military's grand promises of invincibility. Then the atomic bombs wiped out Hiroshima and Nagasaki in a blinding flash. Those two nuclear strikes vaporized well over 100,000 people in just a few days. A week later, Soviet tanks rolled directly across the borders of Manchuria, physically crushing the last remaining Japanese defenses. Soviet armor shredded the mainland. Meanwhile, Tokyo met a new ruler. General Douglas MacArthur stepped from his plane. He clenched a massive corncob pipe. Aviator sunglasses hid his eyes. He surveyed the broken empire. August 15, 1945 changed everything. The American occupation began. It lasted until 1952. MacArthur became Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers. People just called him SCAP. Total culture shock. The nation starved. A Japanese worker survived on barely 1,000 calories daily. Americans brought food, money, and strict new rules. But Washington needed a loyal ally against Soviet communism. Real justice lost its value. The Tokyo Tribunal opened. Pure theater. A grand show. They wanted to intimidate the angry public. Useful leaders received secret pardons. Others took the fall. No mercy. American military police walked through the tight prison corridors and dragged out former commanders for public show executions. American military medics kicked in the heavy doors of a quiet Tokyo mansion. MacArthur's ultimate prize for the upcoming tribunal was bleeding out on the floor. Former Prime Minister Hideki Tojo lay gasping for air. A dark red stain rapidly expanded across his crisp white shirt. Just moments earlier, a sharp knock from the military police had echoed through the house. He had stood in his cramped home office and carefully aimed a pistol at his chest. Now, the thick smell of burned gunpowder hung heavily over the fallen dictator. The ambitious general took power in 1941 and immediately greenlit the strike on Pearl Harbor. He built a massive military juggernaut that thrived on pure ruthlessness and blind devotion. For years, he ordered his soldiers to choose honorable suicide over the shame of capture. The reality was brutal. During the infamous Bataan Death March, his troops drove thousands of exhausted prisoners into the ground. Far away in Manchuria, Unit 731 operated freely under his command. His loyal scientists infected at least 3,000 helpless captives with plague and cholera. Then the empire collapsed in August 1945. The men who acted like gods suddenly had to answer for their burning cities and shattered nation. When the enemy finally knocked on his door, the supposedly fearless leader chose a quick exit. But his hand trembled. He missed his heart. This pathetic attempt to dodge the rope would permanently destroy his legacy among the Japanese public. Citizens saw a miserable hypocrite who refused to share the bitter fate of his ruined troops. American doctors kept him alive. The dictator who demanded his troops fight to the last drop of blood now sat on a wooden bench and meticulously took notes. Instead of an honorable death by his own bullet, Hideki Tojo went straight to a cell in the American Sugamo prison. The 1946 tribunal was not just a court, it was a globally broadcast show. Blinding flashes from reporters' cameras bounced off the walls. The Americans transformed the former Japanese War Ministry building into a bright theater of justice. Prosecutors branded Tojo a Class A war criminal. The trial turned into a mechanical assembly line. The man who once commanded millions of lives now obediently put on headphones and listened to American translators. Clerks typed every spoken word. The transcripts of the Tokyo trials eventually filled over 48,000 pages. The hungry Japanese public watched their former god shrink into a polite, balding old man. He did not yell. He just followed the rules. The spectacle dragged on for 2 long years. On November 12, 1948, the judges read the final verdict: guilty. Tojo and 6 other top leaders received the death penalty. The final act played out on December 23, 1948. Guards walked him down a narrow corridor just after midnight. A heavy canvas hood slipped over his head. The dull thud of the trap door echoed across the concrete floor. The rope snapped tight. The Americans secretly cremated the bodies so no grave could ever become a place of pilgrimage. How did a legendary strategist become a butcher? His own men simply stopped listening. Hideki Tojo sat safely in Tokyo. Tomoyuki Yamashita met his nightmare in the Philippines. Soldiers called him the Tiger of Malaya. In 1942, he conquered Singapore. Enemies respected him. Then came 1945. The Americans struck hard. The Japanese lines shattered. Total chaos ruled the streets. Military discipline vanished. Soldiers became a feral gang. The Manila Massacre started. Burning roofs crackled. Trapped civilians screamed. Nobody listened anymore. Yamashita fought elsewhere. He signed no execution orders. While cabinet strategists drew maps, his retreating soldiers burned the capital, slaughtering tens of thousands of civilians. In August 1945, Yamashita surrendered to American troops, expecting standard prisoner treatment. Instead, on December 7, 1945, a military tribunal announced his verdict. To make that conviction happen, the victors invented a brand new legal tool: command responsibility. A general pays with his life for the sins of his men, even without giving a single order. The trial kicked off in Manila in October 1945. The broken city wanted revenge. Prosecutors ignored the lack of hard evidence. Yamashita had lost all radio contact with his rogue units. He knew nothing of the slaughter. It did not matter. The military court rushed the hearings. They bent the rules to guarantee a quick hanging. His lawyers took the fight to Washington. The United States Supreme Court dismissed the general's appeal by 6 votes to 2. That decision locked in a brutal legal precedent for decades. Standing before the judges, Yamashita listened to the death sentence. His voice stayed completely calm. He declared he did everything possible for his homeland. On February 23, 1946, he faced the gallows. They hanged him in an empty prison. Yamashita died for losing control. General Masaharu Homa faced worse. His own officers betrayed him. Who killed him? The very men he trusted with his life. They drank together 4 years earlier. They swore eternal loyalty. Now they begged to testify against him. 1941 brought easy glory. Homa led the brutal Philippine invasion. His army captured Manila with lightning speed. Then came the Bataan Death March. Stifling heat choked the air. Thick dust coated the dirt roads. Exhausted prisoners collapsed. Guards bayoneted them. Then came the 1945 capitulation. American interrogators started asking hard questions. Honor vanished. Fear took over. The military elite lost their face. They talked. They blamed Homa. The frightened officers eagerly shifted all the blame for the dead prisoners onto the shoulders of their former boss. Masaharu Homa sat at a small desk in his cell, carefully drawing ink characters on a farewell letter. The 1946 military tribunal flew by at lightning speed. Prosecutors built their entire case on the harrowing stories of the Death March survivors, leaving no room for excuses. The general listened to the endless accounts of starvation and executions without saying a word. The judges pronounced him guilty and immediately handed down a death sentence. Rough paper rustled under his pen as he wrote desperate apologies to his wife. Homa expressed deep sorrow for the ruined empire, but maintained his stubborn pride as a career soldier. Across the ocean, his wife begged Douglas MacArthur for clemency to spare her husband from the firing squad. MacArthur personally read the plea and coldly rejected it without a single second thought. Before the guards took their prisoner outside, military police stripped Homa of every single medal. They ripped the gold insignia right off his uniform. On April 3, 1946, guards led him into a quiet Philippine field near Los Baños. Executioners tightly bound his arms to a thick wooden post. An American officer raised his hand and shouted a brief command. A dry crack of a rifle volley shattered the morning silence. Homa fell. Gravediggers buried the old military leadership in unmarked dirt. Back in Tokyo, civilian politicians quietly prepared to occupy the newly emptied government offices. People dropped to their knees around wooden radio sets. Dead silence filled the ruined houses. Only static hissed from the speakers. It was August 15, 1945. The Tokyo hangman would soon snap the necks of ruthless generals, but they completely bypassed the empire's main man. Emperor Hirohito finally spoke to his subjects. The Japanese expected the booming voice of a deity. Instead, they heard a shaky, uncertain human admitting defeat. The shock broke the nation. They had worshipped this man since 1926. They called his reign Showa, meaning radiant peace. Peace never came. Born in 1901, Hirohito spent decades signing papers that destroyed millions of lives. Months later, this same voice would force the nation to renounce their faith. But back in 1941, he cold-bloodedly sent them to die at Pearl Harbor. He was no helpless puppet. He willingly greenlit the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. The next year, he authorized the terror bombing of Shanghai. High explosives ripped through crowded streets in 1932. The raid slaughtered thousands of civilians in mere days. That body count easily beat the total losses of entire local wars of the time. And the supposed symbol of peace personally stamped the order. Ordinary families starved and burned under American firebombs, believing they suffered for a living God. Now they realized they bled for a politician in a palace. Furious crowds in China and Korea flooded the streets and demanded a criminal trial for the emperor. Why send a living God to the scaffold when you can turn him into a convenient puppet? While millions of survivors across Asia screamed for an execution, General Douglas MacArthur was quietly drafting a totally different script for the emperor. Yesterday, he was an untouchable idol in heavy silks. Now, he posed in a neat Western tie against scorched cities. The Supreme Commander needed a stable country to hold the line against the communists, so he offered an incredibly cynical bargain. The deal was simple. He guaranteed total immunity for the throne in exchange for complete submission to American authority. By keeping the ruler safely in power, MacArthur deliberately ignored the raw fury of 400 million victims in China and Korea just to build a reliable anti-Soviet bridgehead. Japanese society had to swallow this bitter exchange, watching the architect of their misery seamlessly rebrand himself overnight. On the first day of 1946, Hirohito delivered another broadcast and officially renounced his own divine status. He calmly told a shattered population that he was merely a regular human being, wiping out centuries of sacred tradition in a few brief sentences. Under the new Constitution of 1947, the law stripped him of all military command and transformed the supreme warlord into a harmless democratic mascot. He traded his military uniform for civilian clothes and started touring the most brutal destruction zones to show his fabricated empathy. In the spring of 1946, Hirohito walked through the completely flattened radioactive wasteland of Hiroshima, where about 140,000 people had recently perished. He moved slowly in a slightly wrinkled European suit, stepping carefully past the twisted metal and pulverized concrete. The clean imported fabric of his tailored trousers stood out sharply against the thick black coal dust that covered the ruined streets. Survivors with horrific flash burns still dropped to their knees and bowed deeply to the exact man who had brought this overwhelming tragedy upon them. The rebranded monarch successfully sold his new image to the world. The plan worked. He spent his remaining decades peacefully studying marine biology in his private palace laboratories, perfectly shielded from any legal consequences. The man who authorized a global slaughter lived comfortably until his natural death in 1989, without ever spending a single day inside a courtroom. Yoshio Kodama built an empire in occupied China. He hoarded resources. Cities burned. Hirohito kept his palace, but ordinary people starved. Their survival depended on smugglers. Kodama ran the black market. People traded everything. Contraband gold gleamed in the ruins to buy basic rice rations. He smuggled drugs. He moved cash. Real power shifted to the profiteers. Then came 1945. The country surrendered. The Allies grabbed the underworld boss. American military police locked him inside Sugamo prison as a suspected war criminal. Who actually ran the ruined country? The official government or crime bosses fueled by American intelligence money? A cell inside Sugamo prison was supposed to be Yoshio Kodama's final stop, but the Cold War changed the game. In 1948, the heavy iron doors swung open. Kodama stepped out into the daylight. The view shifted from the prison yard to smoke-filled back rooms. The underworld kingpin now handed thick stacks of CIA cash to ambitious politicians. Free and clear, the streets belonged to the Yakuza. Ordinary citizens survived on barely 1,000 calories a day. They starved. Meanwhile, the black market boomed. Kodama controlled the flow of stolen military goods. He monopolized the smuggled sugar. Its rich, sweet taste became the ultimate symbol of luxury among the shattered neighborhoods. Mothers traded family heirlooms for a single bag. The gangster grew rich feeding the desperate. In 1955, this dark money helped forge the Liberal Democratic Party. CIA funds poured through a crime boss into the LDP. This cash bought the loyalty of the Japanese government for the next 50 years. A democratic facade built entirely on criminal money. His reach entered every single home. Kodama controlled not only illegal products, but even the scripts of soap operas watched by Japanese housewives. He dictated what the public consumed. He died in 1984, taking his final breath as an untouchable shadow broker. Class A meant death, zero chance of pardon. Kodama bought the streets. Next door at Sugamo sat Nobusuke Kishi. His path to the gallows began earlier. The 1930s, Manchuria. Kishi managed the occupied territories. He viewed human lives as cheap fuel. Desk clerks drafted the death quotas. Paperwork destroyed families without a single gunshot. No weapons, just stamps and files. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese and Korean workers became slaves. One pen stroke doomed them. They worked, they starved, they died. Kishi simply ordered fresh bodies. This sterile cruelty built the empire. Americans later noticed this ruthless bureaucratic grip. They wanted it for Japan's economic leap. 1945 arrived. Japan surrendered. The Allies locked Kishi away. He sat in his cell, waiting for a trial as a war criminal of Category 1. How did the architect of slave labor manage to take the Prime Minister's chair just 9 years after his release? He simply found a new buyer for his ruthless skills. By 1948, the growing fear of communism forced Washington to quietly forget all about his atrocities. He walked out of his cell without facing a single formal charge for the millions of lives he ruined. The man traded his prison clothes for a tailored suit and stepped right back into the political arena. When 1957 came around, this former inmate successfully seized the office of Prime Minister. He drove a massive economic boom, turning a broken nation into a bustling manufacturing powerhouse. The deafening roar of heavy machines in brand new Japanese factories easily drowned out the dark past of their main creator. The smiling Prime Minister shook hands with former enemies, while victims of his regime watched this on television. People across China and Korea recognized the face of the man who orchestrated their brutal occupation. Nobody cared. Japanese society had to accept a bizarre deal, embracing a comfortable economic miracle built on total national amnesia. The ruthless manager of forced labor became a respected international statesman with a spotless public image. It was a completely hypocritical facade. Washington deliberately partnered with a known war criminal to maintain a loyal anti-communist stronghold in the region. Where did the common laborers on Tokyo construction sites in the 1950s come from? They were former career officers. In 1947, Tokyo lay in ruins, and the new Article 9 forever banned the nation from taking up arms. Shovels scraped against concrete, heavy tools clanked, men cleared the debris. Yesterday, they commanded troops. Today, they laid bricks. They swept streets. They kept quiet. Emperor Hirohito kept his throne. The nation played the harmless pacifist. Citizens rebuilt the country with bare hands. Factories replaced barracks. Economic growth began. Former enemies mixed cement side by side. The dark past vanished behind hard work. Nobody asked them unnecessary questions. Nobusuke Kishi stood before the mirror. He dropped his prison uniform on the floor. He buttoned up a crisp, custom-tailored suit, ready to reclaim his power. While ordinary citizens cleared rubble to build a pacifist paradise, the old elite simply walked back into government offices. The Allies initially promised to clean the house. They banned generals and politicians from public life, a massive purge. But the ban vanished fast. Washington needed experienced hands to run the state. Fear of the Soviet Union rewrote the rules. The Cold War demanded reliable allies. Think of an entire city, the exact population of Geneva. You kick every single resident out onto the street, only to quietly guide them back to their warm leather chairs. 200,000 military men and bureaucrats. Ordinary Japanese citizens watched this flip in quiet shock. The exact same faces returned to the high desks. The cleansing was pure theater. Inside the restored ministries, the halls smelled of expensive tobacco again. Suspected war criminals walked out of their cells without a scratch. Yoshio Kodama left prison and started funding the new ruling class. He bankrolled politicians with underworld cash. These men did not just survive the change, they owned the new era. The people who sparked a massive war now managed the peace. Nobusuke Kishi confidently pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the executive cabinet. He officially assumed the office of Prime Minister. Where do you go today to honor Class A war criminals? You walk straight to the Yasukuni Shrine, where prominent politicians regularly gather to bow their heads. While the new Prime Minister rewrote the national budget, priests quietly added the men hanged in 1948 to the lists of saints. The victims demanded real justice. Instead, the occupation forces handed them a brief military tribunal. Then the survivors watched those exact same commanders receive eternal worship at the main national altar. Allied prosecutors promised strict accountability when the tribunals finally opened their doors. From 1946 to 1948, 28 top-tier leaders sat in the dock facing the full weight of international judgment. The judges eventually hanged only 7 of them, including the notorious Hideki Tojo. Thousands of lesser-known officers faced secondary tribunals scattered across places like Hong Kong and Singapore. But the final verdicts felt incredibly hollow. The pain never really faded. The gavels came down and the prison doors slammed shut. But the deep cultural wounds across the Asian continent never actually closed. Today, that unresolved grief bleeds into the streets every time a government official steps through the shrine's massive wooden gates. You can hear the dull beat of protest drums and the angry shouts of the crowd echoing through the avenues. It is a yearly ritual that rips open the scars of the past for families whose grandparents perished under military rule. The diplomatic backlash is immediate. China and Korea instantly dispatch official notes of protest to condemn the political visits.